Welcome to another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard on this series of learning about anarchy. Oh, so we left off talking about have humans always been patriarchal, and to show that no, we have not. It highly depends on the type of civilization and the type of behavior and the type of values that those different cultures and civilizations recognize. You can go check that out in the last episode. But today we're going to do this section here. Aren't people naturally warlike? Um, so this is a fairly short section, and that's good because I have to keep it short today. I missed this episode on Friday, and this is Sunday, and I need to have this a lot of other stuff, going on. I want to hang out with the family, but I want to make sure I'm more consistent with getting these done on a weekly basis. So, anyways, going to jump right into this. How aren't people naturally warlike? Political philosophers like Thomas Hobbes and psychologists like Sigmund Freud. I'm not sure if he's counted as a real psychologist anymore. I don't know. I know a lot of people have been kind of going against that idea, but I do wonder if it's a little outdated. If he's still counted as a respected psychologist, because I know. Anyways, they assume that civilization and government have a moderating effect on what they saw as people's warlike and brutal instincts. Pop culture representations of human origins, like the first scenes of the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, or the illustrations in children's books of hyper-masculine cavemen battling mammoths and saber-toothed tigers, provide a picture that can be as convincing as memory. Yeah, that's problematic. That's propaganda, basically, right? Early humans had to fight one another and even battle nature to survive. But if early human life had been as bloody and warlike as our mythology has depicted it, humans would simply have died out. There you go. Any species with a reproductive cycle of 15 to 20 years that usually only produce one offspring at a time simply cannot survive if their chance of dying in any given year is more than a couple percent. Yeah, it would have been mathematically impossible for Homo sapiens to have survived that imaginary battle against nature and against one another. Yeah, that's a huge thing, right? You always hear that all the time about, oh, life was brutal back then. And I talked about this in many other, podcasts and episodes, talking about how hunter-gatherer cultures, which was how humans were for a long time, hundreds of thousands of years, were way more efficient and way more not just survivable but enjoyable in a way for a long time, right? And when you look at evolutionary, like what they're saying here, like the fact that we became a mammal species that not only, unlike other mammals where they could pop out another one and within a few weeks, maybe even in some cases in a few days, those animals, those are the children, right? The mammalian children are able to be almost completely mature in a way, right? They can fend for themselves basically within a few days, weeks, or months at most. I think the longest one is elephants, and they take about a couple years. But humans, we take a long time, right? Several, almost like I say here, almost 2 decades before a human is fully mature. And even back then, when people like to say, "Oh, people were just more mature faster back then," like, no, not necessarily. Granted, many civilizations did teach their young to attain their own foods, right? By like many cultures, were able to get most of their food to fill about, I think, roughly 80% by the age of 6, based on how they raise their children. But that does not mean they were able to fend for themselves. They were not able to go out and be by themselves. We are extremely social creature, right? And that fact in and of itself should boggle this whole argument that we are warlike, violent animals. If we were, we would be like spiders, right? Who literally cannot coexist with another spider en masse or anything like that. They would rather eat their own. They would eat their own, right? Even after or during, reproduction, they would eat the mates. Okay, so if we were naturally violent, we would be a solitary species. We would not be so social. So it really is a silly argument that people say, "Oh, humans are naturally violent," and all this other stuff. That's just misanthropic. Anarchists have long alleged that war is a product of the state. Hope we get there, because I have some things to say about that. Which I've said before, so maybe I won't say it. Some anthropological research has produced accounts of peaceful stateless societies, and of warfare among other stateless societies that was little more than a rough sport with few casualties. Naturally, the state has found its defenders, who have set out to prove that war is indeed inevitable and thus not the fault of specific oppressive social structures. In one monumental study, War Before Civilization, Lawrence Keeley showed that of an extensive sample of stateless societies, a large number had engaged in aggressive warfare, and a great majority had engaged at the very least in defensive warfare. Only a tiny minority had never encountered war, and a few fled their homelands to avoid war. Interesting. Let's see if this is true. Keeley was endeavoring to show that people are warlike, even though his results demonstrated that people could choose from a wide range of behaviors, including being warlike, avoiding war, but still defending against aggression, not knowing war at all, and disliking war so much they would flee their homeland rather than fight. Interesting. Contrary to his title, Keeley was documenting war after civilization, not before. A major part of his data on non-Western societies came from explorers, missionaries, soldiers, traders, and anthropologists who rode the waves of colonization around the world, bringing land conflicts and ethnic rivalries to previously unimaginable scales through mass enslavement, genocide, invasion, evangelism, and the introduction of new weapons, diseases, and addictive substances. Needless to say, the civilizing influence of the colonizers generated warfare at the margins. Yeah, that's interesting there. Because what I saw when I was studying hunter-gatherer cultures, you can look this up yourself. I'll put the sources in the description if I remember, is that the creation of war, right, was created, right? It wasn't always there. In fact, they can see in anthropological results of studies and digs and things like that, most people did not die by aggression, by features of aggression by another human. Like, you kind of tell the difference if somebody was blocked in the head, or if they were chewed, or if they were eaten by another animal, or if they died by disease or by old age or whatever, right? You can tell the difference. And they, to this date, they have not been able to find very many instances of large-scale warfare between different hunter-gatherer societies, and specifically not just any hunter-gatherer societies, but the ones that were foragers, not primarily aggregators. So there is a spectrum of hunter-gatherer societies, those who foraged on a regular basis almost every single day, and those who were more like fishermen, where they would, go out and forage, they go out and find your fish or whatever, but they would get a whole bunch in one day and then store the rest for later. Right? There's a spectrum of these hunter-gatherer societies, and on the side of the hunter-gatherers that got their food every day, there was very little proof or evidence of large-scale war. I think the largest they seen was like a spat between a couple dozen people between two civilizations, and what they were able to figure from there was that it was more of a domestic abuse type of situation, right? Which happens and has always happened, but it did not happen regularly, right? That was a phenomenon. That was a outlier, right? And so the evidence of large-scale warfare actually grows more common with the increase in societies that were more agrarian, right? That had more to protect. Because when you go ahead and store a whole bunch of food, a bunch of resources, you begin to change your strategy. Your strategy begins to not just being storing resources, but realizing that other people who store resources, right, have more to take. So it's a whole other thing, right? It's a whole other creation of the very mentality of war, of the strategy of war. Like, before, there was even there's no need to war, because like, what are you going to take from people, right? Who don't necessarily keep anything, right? There's no point. And there's no nationalism, because everybody lives the same type of life. Or even if they have a different community, there's no point in going to war about them, because people can leave and come from each of those communities. However, it was very open borders. But when you have these closed garden communities, right, you create a sense of scarcity. Not that the scarcity is actually real, but you create a perceived scarcity. And with that comes greed and all this other stuff. So human behavior is largely, in fact, an effect of the environment. The environment, not just how it is, like with nature, but how we create it as well, right? We create the environment, and then our behavior, reflects the environment that we create for ourselves. So yeah, very interesting here. Keely's study characterizes as warlike societies that had been peaceful for for 100 years, but were chased off their land and given the options of starving to death, or invading their neighbor's territory for even the worst of circumstances. Not to say that in such circumstances there was anything. Oh, I'm sorry, that I skipped something. Given the options of starving to death or invading their neighbor's territory. Oh my gosh, I'm so lost. Keely's study characterizes as warlike societies that have been peaceful for 100 years, but were chased off their land and, given their options of starving to death or invading their neighbor's territory for a space to live, chose the latter. Okay, I see. Yeah. The fact that under these conditions of global colonialism, genocide, and enslavement, and any societies remain peaceful at all proves that if people really want to, they can be peaceful, even in the worst of circumstances. Not to say that in such circumstances there is anything wrong with fighting back against aggression. Indeed. War may be the result of natural human behavior, but so is peace. Violence certainly existed before the state, but the state developed warfare and domination to unprecedented levels. As one of its greatest proponents pointed out, war is the health of the state. Oof. And it is in no mistake that the institutions of power in our civilization, media, academia, government, religions, have exaggerated the prevalence of war and understated the possibility for peace. These institutions are invested in ongoing wars and occupations. They profit from them, and attempts to create a more peaceful society threaten their existence. Ooh, throwing bars right now. God damn. I know I heard this phrase before. I don't know who it's from, but that does seem to be true, right? We see this all the time here in America, where most of our, as we all know, most of our tax dollars and stuff like that goes towards the government, towards the military industrial complex. And even people who are in the military, right? I know plenty of people who are in the military, they don't like that. They don't like the fact that our war, the army is very much commoditized. It's like just shove more money in there. And I know a lot of people who are trying to, make it better. So it's not just, just stick a whole bunch of money in there and not worry about innovating the process or making it, better overall. It's just throwing money in there. And, and then many of those government contracts they create all these sorts of weapons and all this other stuff and sell that to the other states. And so now you have things like, what's going on with the Middle East and things like that. And it just becomes a, self-reporting problem. And then on top of all that, what I recently learned is that you have to teach people to kill. You have to teach people to kill. They did a study. There's apparently it's a very big known thing amongst the folks who are in the military, especially back a couple decades ago, is that most people, roughly 80% of people, never actually kill anybody when they're in a war. Meaning the people in a battle, right? The people in the armies who have a gun in their hands or whatever, right? Almost never actually kill or shoot to kill the enemy. And apparently this was a huge problem, to where they realized that only 20% of, the people in the army would actually shoot to kill people. And they were the ones that you had to watch out for because they were a little, out there. And the rest of the people who even, sorry, I got, it's so cute. My sister's name is Al. But so I'm not sure if you can see my Discord messages coming up there. So sorry if you do. But lost my track. Oh yeah. Well, I'll put that video in the description. You can check it out yourself. But basically they had to come up with a way to dehumanize the enemy so that people felt more comfortable shooting to kill. And they had to actually make shooting to kill a reactionary thing, so you don't think about it, right? And that's why you have all these military drills where you go into the drill of shooting at a human-shaped target, right? So you get into the routine of killing somebody, or at least getting to the routine of just shooting to kill without thinking about it. Because the minute you start to think about it, most people like, nah, right? And that speaks so much to the human psyche. The fact that even in a war, right, when people were shooting, there's all this craziness going on. They actually studied, they actually know that most people still would not shoot to kill. right? They would rather, it's not like they were cowards either, right? Because they would go in the midst of battle and they would take ammo in the midst of battle and, guns and cannons flying everywhere, and they would take it out to different people. They would, try to help their friends, the medical, wrap them up and all this other stuff. Like, people were extremely brave, but they would not shoot to kill. And so in America, especially, what they did is created these, military drills and everything like that. Got people practicing in the practice of, number one, creating this routine, so you easily, shoot to kill without even thinking about it. Number two, you build a community with your military friends, so that you view your companions as close as family, right? So you're not going to want them to die. So you're going to do even more, right, to make sure that your companions are, survive. And then number three, you dehumanize the enemy, make them seem like the devil, or these terrible people, or kind of less than human or whatever, right? Super evil. And through these tactics, through these strategies, you have to, that's how you train humans, right, to shoot to kill. And they increase that amount of people that kill people, that shoot to kill, from 20% to almost 80-90%, even higher at this point. So that just goes to show you that humans are not necessarily inherently violent or terrible or whatever, right? You have to teach that. You have to train that. So yeah, I'll share that in the comments. One such, in the description, one such attempt is the Fastlane Peace Camp, a land occupation outside Scotland's Fastlane naval base. I hope I'm saying that right. Fastlane, which houses Trident nuclear missiles. Oh, wow. The Peace Camp is a popular expression of the desire for a peaceful society organized on anarchist and socialist lines. Fastlane Peace Camp has been continuously occupied since June 1982 and is now well established, with hot water and bathroom facilities, a communal kitchen and a living room, and 12 caravans housing permanent residents and space for visitors. The Peace Camp serves as a base area for protests in which people block the roads, shut down the gates, and even penetrate the base itself to carry out sabotage. Galvanized by the Peace Camp, there is widespread popular opposition to the naval base, and some of Scotland's political parties have called for the base to be closed down. In September 1981, a group of Welsh women formed a similar camp, the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp. I think that's Greenham, not Greenham. Greenham. Outside an RAF base cruise missiles in Berkshire, England. Berkshire? I don't know, they say the things differently. The women were forcibly evicted in 1984, but immediately reoccupied the site. And in 1991, the last missiles were removed. The camp remained until 2000, when the women won permission to set up a commemorative memorial. Interesting. These peace camps bear some similarity to the Life and Labor Commune, the largest of the Tolstoyan communes. It was an agricultural commune established near Moscow in 1921 by people following the pacifist and anarchist teachings of Leo Tolstoy. Interesting. I gotta check that out. Its members, nearly 1,000 at their peak, were at odds with the Soviet government on account of refusing to perform military service. For this reason, the commune was finally shut down by the authorities in 1930. But during its existence, the participants created a large self-organized community in peace and resistance. The Catholic worker, let me drink some water. It's always good to see real life examples of these things. The Catholic worker movement began in the United States in 1933 as a response to the Great Depression. But today, many of the 185 Catholic worker communities throughout North America and Europe focus on opposing the militarism of the government and creating the foundations of a peaceful society. Inseparable from their opposition to war is their commitment to social justice, which manifests in soup kitchens, shelters, and other service projects to help the poor that form a part of every Catholic worker house. Although Christian, the Catholic workers generally criticize church hierarchy and promote tolerance of other religions. Beautiful. They are also anti-capitalist, preaching voluntary poverty and distributist communitarianism, self-sufficiency through farming, crafting, and appropriate technology. A radically new society where people will rely on the fruits of their own toil and labor, associations of mutuality, and a sense of fairness to resolve conflicts. Interesting. Some Catholic workers even call themselves Christian anarchists. Catholic worker communities, which function as communes or aid centers for the poor, often provide a base for protests and direct actions against the military. Catholic workers have entered military bases to sabotage weaponry, though they waited for the police afterwards. Wow, essentially going to jail as a further act of protest. Some of their communities also shelter victims of war, such as torture survivors fleeing the results of U.S. imperialism in other countries. Oof. Yeah, U.S. imperialism. Still a thing. Yep. How peaceful a society could we create if we overcame the belligerence of governments and fostered new norms in our culture? The Samai, agriculturists, and Malaya offer one indication. Their murder rate is only 0.56 out of 100,000 per year, compared with 0.86 in Norway, 6.26 in the US, and 20.20 in Russia. Goodness. Wow. This may be related to their child rearing strategy. Traditionally, the Semi do not hit their children, and respect for their children's autonomy is a normalized value in their society. One of the few occasions in which Sinai adults will typically intervene is when children lose their tempers or fight one another, in which case nearby adults will snatch up the children and take them to their respective houses. The major forces that uphold semi-peacefulness seem to be an emphasis on learning self-control and the great importance accorded to public opinion in a cooperative society. Yep. How many times we gotta tell y'all, hitting your children's not good? I'm a person who's raised in that household. I understand all the arguments. It doesn't work. It makes you think it works. That's the problem, right? It gives you perceived value, right? Where you think it works and you say it works because they immediately stopped. But then what lessons do they learn? Don't do it. Why? Because you'll hit them, because of fear, because violence, right? It doesn't go anywhere. People all the time like to try to rationalize it and say, oh, I learned my lesson, right? And then they turn around and beat their kids, in the future. So did you really learn your lesson, or did you just learn to do violence? Like, if you didn't learn how to communicate with people and how to rationalize people out of a problem, or teach people discipline, or whatever you want to teach them without violence, then how did you learn? All you learned was to do the same thing that was done unto you. I'm not going to preach about it because people aren't going to listen, but a large part of the reason why people don't listen is because the overlying environment of our structure, right? The overlying environment of our society. Even today, when we largely say, it's kind of sort of a taboo, it's still not really, because most of the rest of our society is largely built on that violence. Police, look at the police, not even talking about police brutality. Just look at how the police works in general, right? It's through force, it's through coercion. It's not through, reasonable conversation or anything like that. It's not through interventions with the community and trying to understand, the effects or the effects of poverty and the creation of environmental structures which lead to crime, right? The police don't do that. They just go in and try to, solve the problem with coercion. So our entire societal structure is an environment in which supports and encourages violence as an answer, violence as a first result, not as a last resort, but as a first resort. So that's why it's so difficult to really have that conversation. According to Robert Danton, a Western anthropologist who lived with them, little violence occurs within Semai society. Violence, in fact, seems to terrify the Semai. A Semai does not meet force with force, but with passivity or flight. Yet he has no institutionalized way of preventing violence, no social controls, no police or courts. Oh, wow. Beautiful. I need to look them up. Somehow, Semai learns automatically always to keep tight rein over his aggressive impulses. The first time the Semai participated in a war was when the British conscripted them to fight against the communist insurgency in the early 1950s. Clearly, warfare is not an inevitability and certainly not a human need. Rather, it is a consequence of political, social, and economic arrangements, and these arrangements are ours to shape. Beautiful. Can't wait to get to this part as well. But yeah, that's what people don't realize. People love to say, well, just human nature is what we do. It's like, no, it's not. We created this. We created the environment, the incentives, the structure, the society, the civilization, whatever you want to call it. We created the means and the rationalities for violence, for warfare, and all this other stuff. And so if we want to go towards a more peaceful society, we have to learn to unlearn it, to uncreate it, and to create a better society, to show the alternatives and to show it's possible to create a better society. Because a large reason why it seems to be so hard, right, to live in a peaceful society. It's not because it's impossible. It's not because it's against human nature, but because people believe it's against human nature. It's not even because capitalism is so strong and or it's so right or anything like that. It's because people believe that there is no alternative. When you believe there's no alternative, then you're not really gonna entertain any ideas as to why our current system is bad, as to why our current system is fundamentally flawed. You're not going to really want to entertain that because you're going to immediately think there's no alternatives. This is the best we can do, right? It's either this or chaos or anarchy if it's violence. That's the huge part of propaganda, is viewing anarchy as chaos or anarchy as violence and stuff like that. But that's the problem, right? This is why it's so important to educate yourselves, to read, to see other examples, to show through history, through looking at other, how other people live, through introspection, all this other stuff, that there are other alternatives, So I always say I'm not anti-capitalist or anything like that. I'm just curious. I'm just curious to know, can we do better? If so, what will it take? What does that look like? Is it possible? I'm not going to dismiss it, right? If you really want to see whether or not it's possible that something else can live outside of capitalism, or capitalism, even if you think capitalism is the best thing we ever can do, wonder why. What makes it so great, And then when you see all these problems with it, wonder why we have those problems. Where does it come from? Right? It's just, human nature. Well, clearly it's not human nature. Clearly it's not. So yeah, this is why I think it's so important to read these sorts of things. There's just a lot to learn, And I think we can do it. We can create something better. We just got to be open to it and just keep learning, keep being humble, and yeah, there's alternatives. So yeah, thanks as always for watching, for listening, for learning with me. If you have any thoughts or comments or anything like that, feel free to put it in the comments and let me know your thoughts. I'll try to remember to put all that stuff that I mentioned before in the description. If not, then check out my other videos. It's there somewhere. I made a whole video about egalitarianism and hunter-gatherer cultures. I shared like 20 links in there. But I'll try to remember to put it in here as well. Thanks as always, and have a great day. See ya. Bye-bye. I pressed the wrong one.